You are listening to the podcast of the Mathias Corvinus Collegium, the largest talent management institute in Hungary. If you want to know more about our mission, please look up our English website at mcc.hu/en or check out our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter channels. For interesting articles and analysis of our professors, external contributors, and students, look up our knowledge base at corvinus.hu/en.
Greetings to all of our listeners. Today, we have Mr. Piotr Pietrzak as a guest expert who specializes in international relations, geopolitics, conflict resolution strategies, and international law. Piotr Pietrzak is a co-founder and editor-in-chief of In Statu Nascendi, Journal of Political Philosophy and International Relations, a non-profit charitable organization based in Sofia. Mr. Pietrzak is a Polish national residing in the Bulgarian capital. He specializes in the Middle East and the Islamic world and looks at his research area through the prism of some of the most exciting developments in the international relations theory, geopolitics, conflict resolution strategies, and international law. His primary interests relate to recent socio-political developments in Afghanistan, Cyprus, the former Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Egypt, Somalia, and Yemen, as well as Georgia and Ukraine. Also, Pietrzak regularly comments on matters related to the superpower competition during and after the Cold War. So, Piotr, could you tell us, please, why did you choose this field? What made it interesting for you?
First of all, Jó napot, good morning, and thank you very much for this invitation. Thank you very much for Mathias Corvinus Collegium. I'm glad to be in Budapest today, and thank you very much for this question. So basically, that's a very personal question to me, because I think that I could start by saying that I was always interested in history, and the more I read about history, the less I like the ancient history, and the more I like the contemporary history, contemporary politics. And I think the major shift which happened was when I read Zbigniew Brzezinski's major publication, the bestseller, The Grand Chessboard, which basically changed my perspective and focused me towards international affairs, philosophy, political science. And then some other influences came along. But if I would like to mention some other influences, I would also like to suggest that my history teacher was quite influential in my choices. Mr. Jerzy Sidwa, he unfortunately has passed away. The same with Miss Jolanta Kawałczewska, who also passed away, and they were massive influences on my choices. And then I can thank Dr. Przemysław Piotrowski and Professor Arkadiusz Żukowski for their guidance. Professor Selim Hasbievich also helped me a lot to reacquaint myself with certain geopolitical matters which I had no idea about existence. And I'd say that Olsztyn was my first stepping stone in politics, because that's where I graduated my first master's degree. When I did my Erasmus scholarship exchange in Cyprus, I just lived 30 meters from the UN security zone. So each time I was going to Cyprus University, I was passing by various security checkpoints, and that basically triggered my interest in conflict resolution strategies. Professor from Cyprus back then, Georgios Kentas, was a major support, and he guided me through my initial choices in IR theory. Thanks to him, I know such scholars like Joseph Nye or Hans Morgenthau. And then when I started my second master's at Manchester University, I think I can thank many professors from Manchester University, for instance, Dr. Shogo Suzuki, Professor Goran Jorlicki, and many other people like Professor Veronique Pinfat. So I send best regards to these intellectuals from Budapest.
So your field of research covers geographical regions like the Middle East, the Balkans, Eastern Europe, and the Caucasus. What connects these countries? What are the similarities and the so-called common denominators of theirs?
You see, all of these regions are in the process of creation. They're kind of in statu nascendi. There is nothing certain about politics of these regions, and that's why we apply conflict resolution strategies to explain certain social, political, and geopolitical developments which are happening in the Balkans, in the Middle East, in North Africa, as well as in Eastern Europe and Asia. You can basically draw certain analogies between conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh, which happened last year, and Syria. You can draw analogies between what Syria is today, what will be in the future, and what Balkans are today. So there's a number of patterns in global politics. We just need to learn to find them or acknowledge them.
I understand. So let's start with East Europe. As a Polish national, how do you see the current migrant situation on the border with Belarus? Is it a challenge for Poland or for the EU as a whole? How do you see it?
This is a very difficult question, to be honest, because to start with, we need to acknowledge that is a humanitarian emergency in the making, because outside powers or regional powers are trying to use the most vulnerable people there exist in the planet to their political advantages. Belarus is exporting the uncertainty of the Middle East to Eastern Europe by airlifting the refugees to the borderland, basically. Polish government is using the situation to strengthen its nationalistic base, because them being very hawkish and very against providing the humanitarian passage to the Syrian, Iraqi refugees strengthens the political appeal. And the election is in 2 years, in 2023. And the Law and Justice Party is losing the public support. And now we change the perspective to a little bit more communitarian. I'm very closely observing what is happening in the east of Poland, and I hope that it will get resolved. And European Union has a particular role to play. The very fact that recently Mrs. Merkel and Mr. Macron involved in resolving the conflict in the negotiations with President Lukashenko is a positive thing, because there is a solution beyond the borders of Poland, because that's the globalization issue, basically. It's not only local issue to Poland. Hungary faced similar situation in 2015, 2016. And paradoxically, Polish government, just after a few months of similar exposures, got much more funding from European Union to resolve the situation than Hungarian government ever did. So I live in the Balkans, in Bulgaria, and I can see that the migration through the Balkans is decreasing, and now the migrants are trying to find different routes to get to the core of the European Union. Their direction is either Germany, France, or UK, basically. They don't want to stay in Poland or Bulgaria. That just happens to be on their route.
And what about Ukraine? Do you think the Crimea, Donetsk and Luhansk conflicts could ever be solved peacefully amid negotiations involving great powers?
So far, very difficult questions, but I'm ready for that. So I've been observing Ukrainian conflict and Ukrainian political situation ever since the early 1990s. It's nothing new that the internal situation in Ukraine is unstable. Well, ever since 2014, it got out of control, basically. The annexation of Crimea is an unacceptable move by Russia. It will never be recognized by international community. In terms of eastern Ukraine, the situation is similar, and people are dying on the borders. Just a few days ago, another 2 Ukrainian soldiers died. Young people of our age are basically armed to the teeth. They need to protect their land, basically. In the meantime, the internal situation is unstable, and unfortunately some blame is on Ukrainians, because they cannot stabilize their internal situation, and then Russia is taking advantage of the situation. The Minsk process is derailed. The Lukashenko regime is completely focused on something completely different. Putin is massing its Russian army on the eastern border of Ukraine, so the situation can get easily out of control. And anyone who follows the Balkan Peninsula and the opinion about the way the Balkan War started in the 1990s, basically much can be started, and that can be a cause for another global conflict. We need to add to the equation NATO, because yes, Ukraine is not a member of NATO, but NATO strongly supports Ukrainian authorities. The new president, the new government is supported by the Western community, and there is no recognition of Russian territorial annexations, that the claims that those are unacceptable in 21st century.
Yeah, and as Poland is a neighboring country with Ukraine, it would be very interesting to know how is the Ukrainian conflict seen by the Polish public.
Hungary also borders Ukraine, so we share that, and it is in Polish and Hungarian interest and the European Union's interest to solve the situation. So maybe it's time to be more active, because Eastern Partnership of European Union is not working at all. And it's not only in terms of Ukraine, but Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, name another country, Belarus. Nothing works in terms of Eastern Partnership. If the Eastern Partnership doesn't work, maybe it's time to open a new chapter from the EU perspective.
You live in Sofia, Bulgaria. In a recent interview, when asked about the Crimea situation, incumbent head of state Rumen Radev gave a pragmatic answer, claiming that the peninsula now belongs to Russia. From a Bulgarian perspective, how is the Crimea conflict interpreted?
I need to say that the rector Georgikov used it against the president, Rumen Radev, and he used it in very instrumental manner. So I don't think that it was President Rumen Radev who was disrespectful to Ukrainians or Ukrainian political situation. It was the rector who was trying to push the current president with the difficult question.
Yes, we have to ask that Mr. Georgikov also ran in the ballot for president.
Definitely. And to be honest, from my perspective as an outsider, I was shocked, to be honest, when I watched this debate, because the rector of the university cannot ask such a provocative questions. And that is, I think, the time for rector to consider his future at the Sofia University, because we as alumni of Sofia University deserve more, and the students of the university also deserve to have a better representation. But coming back to the main question, what President Rumen Radev should have said is that de jure, Crimea is Ukrainian, and currently Russian troops are still in the peninsula. So de jure and de facto, there are two different assertions from the international law's perspective. The same like we wouldn't recognize the annexation of northern Cyprus.
If we stay in the Black Sea region, we find another conflict zone. Do you think that the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh war between Armenian armed forces and Azerbaijan fits in the bigger picture of the East European conflict zone?
There are certain patterns which are replicated in this conflict, and I follow it from various perspectives. Recently, I reviewed a book by Filip Gamagelian, who is an expert in conflict resolution strategies, and he wrote a book about conflict resolution strategies in Syria and Georgia, and he gives amazing examples on how to resolve certain conflicts. And his publication is named Conflict Resolution Beyond the International Relations Paradigm, published by Ibidem Verlag. I strongly encourage everyone to read that, because it has a lot of insight into the conflict resolution practice, the theory and practice. And that's difficult to connect. So trust me, I try to connect international relations theory with philosophy. And this is not easy, but it's very rewarding when you have certain insights from different worlds, basically. So how do you see conflict which is once frozen and the day after it defreezes, basically? It's very difficult to approach, because Armenia and Azerbaijan, after this 2020 war, neither side is happy. Because, yes, Armenia lost quite a lot of territory in Nagorno-Karabakh, so they are not happy. Azerbaijan didn't get all of the territories, and they are not happy as well. So wars are not very romantic. It's very difficult to achieve any political objectives in the hard power way in the 21st century. Countries should abandon the idea of arming up. They should just choose economical cooperation. That's why, as European Union example shows, that's the best way to resolve the tensions between countries. And that's liberal talk, surely, but it's also realist talk, because realists also start to acknowledge that the tragedy of war is not benefiting anyone except for arms dealers.
What role should the bigger powers play in this conflict resolution? You mentioned the European Union. What about the Eastern Partnership Program and the pre-accession instruments? Can they help the conflict resolution?
Of course they can. The question is why European Union is not more active in these conflict resolution strategies in a Nagorno-Karabakh scenario. Russia is much more active. And Turkey is getting more active. It's just that these parties are traditionally involved. They support either Azerbaijan or Armenia. So they have their stakes and they want to control the narrative over this conflict. Again, I will go back to Gamagelian, but he gives a lot of interesting examples how Azerbaijani and Armenian governments are not interested in resolving the tension because it's politically expedient to continue this conflict from their perspective. It's internal politics. They feed the citizens of their countries with the idea that we are such a mighty military powers, that we can take the land of our neighbor. That's not the future. That's the matter from the past.
And talking about frozen conflicts, your other field of interest is the Middle East and Afghanistan. Do you think we can compare the aforementioned security concerns and political instabilities with the current unsolved situations in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan?
Yes, Middle East, Syria has been my main interest for the last 10 years, I'd say. I'd say that there is many similarities. Human irresponsibility and political lack of accountability, the people who are just so power hungry that they cannot resolve their tensions in the peaceful manner. Syrian conflict is one of the saddest conflicts in the history of the world because it started as an uprising as a part of broader Arab Spring in 2011. It started peacefully, but the government reacted in a very hawkish manner. In 2012, the conflict got radicalized because the rebels found out that they cannot count on the Western powers to support them. So certain groups from Afghanistan, from Iraq, migrated to open their cells in Syria. Muslim Brotherhood-based opposition was infiltrated by Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra. Then in 2013, 2014, Islamic State basically built a little state on the borderland of Syria and Iraq, and everything went out of control. In the meantime, in 2013, Bashar al-Assad used for the first time the chemical weapons against the demonstrators, and he didn't face any punishment because the international community did not react. I mean, President Obama said that that was a red line crossing, but there was no reaction. The Security Council was divided because Russia was always vetoing any constructive negotiations, any constructive idea on how to resolve it. Then in 2015, Russia stepped in, basically, and instead of humanitarian intervention, we ended up having anti-humanitarian intervention by Russian president who just wanted to support his crony in the Middle East. I think he's one of the last friends in the Middle East, President Bashar al-Assad. And ever since 2015, we have a Middle Eastern country, which is basically a 51st state of Russia. That's where comparisons come very handy, because when we add to the equation the fact that Hezbollah and Iran is very active in supporting President al-Assad, and Saudi Arabia, also Turkey are supporting the rebels, plus Al-Qaeda and ISIS up to 2016, 2017 supported radicals, Wahhabi and jihadists from all over the world. All of the other countries who have anything to say in global politics also got involved. The situation is out of control. It's out of control of the Syrian people. The Syrian civil war is being fought by regional and global powers. American contingent in Syria was revealed by Trump president, because before it was never clearly stated that American forces are in Syria. President Trump decided to withdraw them, and by withdrawing them, he acknowledged that they were there in the first place. Turkey, in the north of Syria and north of Iraq, is trying to exercise its power and influence. They are building some sort of safety zone, which protects them from the Kurds, because these territories are ethnically Kurdish. And who fought against ISIS on the ground? In 2014, US sent the intervention to fight against ISIS, but they were dropping bombs. And who actually fought against ISIS on the ground? It was Kurdish fighters, Kurdish Peshmerga, who not only men, but women, they were spilling their blood to protect our civilization from the invasion of radicals, jihadists. And then US and the Western world turned their backs on them. And who is now looking after the jihadi brides and the children of former fighters from ISIS? The Kurds, heavily underpaid, who are struggling to provide basic necessities to the refugees in the camps, who are imprisoned there because no one else wants to admit them, who traveled through Turkey to Syria in order to fight for Islamic State. The same Islamic State that lost the war in Syria and Iraq and now is fighting against Taliban in Afghanistan. So that's the realities we are talking about.
You mentioned global powers. As an international relations expert, how do you see the future of the balance of power between the United States of America, China and Russia?
Zbigniew Brzezinski once wrote a book called Second Chance. And that was a book which was written after George W. Bush's presidency. Brzezinski was calling for American leadership. He was saying that America retracts from its responsibilities. Then it was Barack Obama's presidency which restored aspirations of American people in the credible American leadership. But the Trump presidency showed that America is actually retracting from its global responsibilities, and it's retracting eagerly. President Biden, in his first year in office, which is still ongoing, ended war in Afghanistan. That was a clumsy withdrawal from Afghanistan. Another clumsy withdrawal from Iraq. Well, when it comes to Iraq, it's an interesting situation because Iraqi situation is unstable, as the recent assassination attempt on the Iraqi prime minister shows, because the local hawkish groups are working against peace in the country. But what it is, the status of American forces in Iraq changed from combat forces to providing some sort of guidance force. From global perspective, America is still trying to keep its forces in the Middle East, but it withdraws from its responsibilities elsewhere. I don't know whether it is oil in Iraq which is attracting them. What I would like to say is that Russia, China, and perhaps India and Pakistan are very likely to start working together against the West in the broader perspective, against the United States and European Union. Unfortunately, there is lack of strategic thinking in the West. We are just becoming observers of the global politics. We are not shaping global politics anymore. It's Putin, it's Xi Jinping who are in charge of the policy now. And that's unfortunate because I don't know whether it is incapability of our leaders in the West or their political advisors. It could be former.
What future do you see for the EU in this balance of power game?
Well, where there is such a disparity between powers, where there is constant struggle, I think the EU has a lot of opportunities. Because, first of all, we are one of the most successful economic projects in the history of mankind. One of the best political projects in terms of resolving conflicts in peaceful manners. Academically, and in terms of our abilities as educational power, educational superpower, I would say. Our scholars are outsmarting colleagues from Russia, China, and United States combined. That's perhaps a little bit internal perspective on the matters, but European Union can be a factor if we start working together for common good and overcome our internal difficulties. Because European Union is the future. We've just started. Watch us.
Yes, I really like your positive vibes. Mr. Pietrzak is a co-founder and editor-in-chief of In Statu Nascendi, an English-language journal of political philosophy and international relations, as we mentioned in the introduction and the beginning of our conversation. So, Piotr, how this project emerged? What are the main goals and objectives of your journal?
It is a journal of all of us. We are publishing ever since 2018. So far, we've published 7 different books, 4 volumes in total. The first volume was in 2018, then it was followed by 2 in 2019, 2 in 2020, and the last one we've published was in October 2021. So it's a common effort. We came together in Bulgaria. with the idea that there is plenty of opportunity for bringing together philosophy and international relations theory, because people are interested in both. And they usually, when they reach out for journals, they would have to buy 2 different journals in order to read about philosophy and international relations. And if you have these combined, you can attract more readers. Our organization is a non-governmental organization, so we act as a charity under Bulgarian law. We attract a lot of scholars, young and older scholars who publish together. They come together, they work towards common goal. It's becoming a strong network. More than 120 academics from all across the world are publishing. We are published by Ibn Verlag in Europe and Columbia University Press in the States and all over the world. We have some of the most sophisticated members of editorial boards. Some of them are from Hungary. Some of them are from Poland, Cyprus, Croatia, of course, Bulgaria. We used to have Bulgarians and Italians. We have Greek. I hope that the future is bright, and I hope that soon we will be indexed by Scopus. I cannot promise that that will be next year or in 2 years, but that's our ultimate goal, that our work and the work of our younger colleagues will be recognized by international community of academics as well. So far, we are indexed by Index Copernicus. So do our papers make impact? They start slowly, little by little. It takes time to establish new academic journal, and we are ready for this challenge to go on with that until the inevitable success. The team is growing. We have more and more people who are volunteering their work. It is non-governmental organization, so currently we would like to attract some funding, which would be great. But we can also work in the current way, which is by committing our free time to this project. And by peer-reviewing our work, we can improve it and we can showcase it to different academics.
So from Mathias Corvinus Collegium, we wish you all good luck.
Thank you very much.
To achieve your considerable goals. I remember in 2019, you organized the first international interdisciplinary academic conference on international relations and philosophy under the name In Statu Nascendi. When we can expect the second event to take place?
That's a good question, because we were planning that for 2023, but because of pandemic, the work on the second part of the conference currently is postponed. And to be honest, the first international conference was organized in Sofia. The next one can be in Budapest. So if anyone is interested in hosting the event in Budapest, we are open to the idea, because it's a wonderful city. Guys, I just want to say that you are very lucky to live in this city, because it's incredible. If I ever lived in Budapest, I would never move out.
Thank you. That would be lovely to have such an event here in Budapest. And we have one question left, a personal one.
Okay.
If I may ask.
Of course.
As a Polish national, how do you see life in Sofia? What do you like the most about the Bulgarian capital city?
When it comes to Sofia and Bulgaria, the amazing thing which I came across is the people. The people of Bulgaria are just incredible. I see a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of vibe, people who are very ambitious, very friendly, very optimistic about the future. And that shows in the political choices of today, basically. Recently, we had the third parliamentary election in the country, and finally, fingers crossed, the country will move forward, and that will be even a better place to live. Since it is a private question and a personal question, I can say that I'm married to a very beautiful Bulgarian woman, and we have 2.5-year-old young boy who is missing me because I'm here in Budapest and he is in Sofia, looked after by his granny. I would like to say yes, it could be considered to be one of the poorest countries in the European Union, but it is one of the most beautiful and one of the most peaceful nations in Europe. Because considering what was happening in 1990s in the Western Balkans, when you look in the Eastern Balkans, Bulgaria, the changes went in much more peaceful manner. And that goes on in this mentality. Very peaceful, respectful people who inhabit this land are heavily underpaid, as a matter of fact. So I hope that the changing political climate will offer more opportunities to the Bulgarian nation. And that's my hope for the next 5-10 years.
Piotr Pietrzak, thank you very much for sharing your most appreciated thoughts and views with us. We wish you good luck for your future endeavors. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you very much, and Jonna Podkiwano. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this MCC Podcast episode. For further media content, please look up our English website at mcc.hu/en or look for us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you want to read more by our professors, external contributors, and students, check out our knowledge base at corvinus.hu/en.